Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I bring warm greetings on behalf of His Excellency President Ly Dak Wat Taming and the people of the Marshall Islands. In addition, the Republic of the Marshall Islands supports and aligns itself with the statement of the Republic of Nauru, speaking on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States. Mr. President, the Republic of the Marshall Islands fully acknowledges the complexities of the possible security implications of climate change. The issue of climate change poses unparalleled questions to the international community and thus requires a coherent response by all within a cooperative framework and involving cross-sectoral actions to address development aspirations as well as security issues. For a low-lying island nation like the Marshall Islands, climate change also poses some very clear and obvious questions to our existence. The security implications of climate change pose a direct and very real threat to our sovereignty, survival, and fundamental freedoms assured by the UN Charter. No longer can member states afford to consider that the loss of entire nations does not create a critical threat to global international security. Mr. President, the Republic of the Marshall Islands is proud that the United Nations General Assembly has been able to work together on this resolution in a spirit of cooperative and positive cooperation. This resolution expresses serious global concern over the survival of whole populations and their land in the face of climate impacts. By addressing climate change in a holistic fashion, we ensure that UN organs treat this issue with appropriate urgency and within the respective mandates of the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and the Security Council. We also seek the active engagement of all nations addressing other climate interlinkages, including the human dimension of climate change, as well as its implications for sustainable development and the law of the sea. Mr. President, this resolution was first initiated by a group of small island nations in the Pacific who are acutely vulnerable to climate impacts. For Pacific Islands, climate change exists not only in the lens of its scientists, but in a very visible effect already observed by our communities. Our Pacific Islands Forum leaders identified the security implications of climate change last August in the Niue Declaration, and last September in our leaders' collective urge that this body properly acknowledge the security implications of climate change. Last week, our leaders emerged from the 5th Pacific Islands Leaders Meeting in Hokkaido with the initiative of the Pacific Environment Community, in which Japan will be working closely with Pacific Island Forum partners to support practical Pacific-tailored approaches to combating climate change. The Pacific and the European Union have also initiated a joint declaration in 2008 on shared commitments to climate change, and additional discussions are underway with other partners, including developing nations. All nations, and particularly the most vulnerable nations, may face intensified climate impacts, including competition for increasingly scarce resources, which may pose serious barriers for some to achieving international development goals. We urge all nations to fully express their views in the invited Secretary General's report. We further expect that this report will further detail practical strategies through which the UN as a whole can proactively address these potential implications now and with due urgency. Mr. President, in the low-lying islands of the Marshall Islands, we cannot move our people to higher ground, for there is no mountain. As a nation and as a culture so closely dependent upon our oceans and coastal areas, we cannot simply replace these areas. We cannot move our communities to less vulnerable locations on coral atolls, which are already so thin you can stand in the lagoon and see the waves crashing clear across the atoll's other side. Mr. President, with the Marshall Islands height of only 2 meters above sea level, even the most conservative 2007 scientific projections of the UN scientific body, the IPCC, which are associated with a sea level rise of 20 to 30 centimeters before the next century, clearly shows with certainty threats to our national survival and with ensuing upheaval of our land, our basic water and food security, as well as the pillars of our traditional culture. The highest IPCC scenarios of sea level rise greater than half a meter pose even more severe threats to our existence. Most recently, the IPCC Scientific Coordinator on Sea Level Rise stated that the IPCC findings are likely to be biasly low and that new research shows that the risk of ice sheet melts, which are already being observed, would lead to an increase of 4 meters or greater in sea level rise. Other scientists have further revised this analysis and recently issued a claim that ice sheet-related total sea level rise may be at a lesser rate of only 3 meters. Mr. President, this is hardly considered good news, as it is a rate of change which nonetheless will completely submerge my nation. The existence of a tipping point leaves us with a very small window for urgent international action, perhaps as little as 10 years, to best avoid irreversible and abrupt climate impacts. The people of the Marshall Islands hope and pray that we will not reach this point of no return. For the Republic of the Marshall Islands, this is more than just a development barrier. Mr. President, the Marshallese people have not taken these threats silently. Instead, we are actively confronting climate impacts. Despite our capacity limitations as a developing nation, like our Pacific neighbors, we are taking actions and remain committed to building our resilience to combat the effects of climate change by prioritizing, among other goals, water security, energy conservation, the conservation of traditional plants and non-invasive crops to address coastal erosion, and food security by promoting climate-sensitive strategies, as well as to implement ecosystem approaches to adaptation, just as the Micronesian Challenge, which is a sub-regional commitment to conserve 30% of our near-shore marine and 20% of our terrestrial resources. We are also doing our part to implement renewable energy strategies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, even though they are already practically nil. We are revising our national energy policy as the foundation to meeting our commitment to significantly improve energy efficiency and reduce our reliance on oil through utilizing practical and affordable renewable energy resources. We seek to continue to work with our partners to build our national capacity to capture and manage projects, and at the same time also implementing our concrete strategies. Yet we cannot fully remedy our reduce climate impacts, including security implications, without an ability to efficiently access funding for adaptation and mitigation, which appropriately focus on concrete results and without the meaningful commitment to funding based on the polluter pays unquote principle. Funding streams must be set aside and dedicated to the most vulnerable nations with the provision of direct and simplified access. Mr. President, we find some of the strongest support for our survival in the principles of the UN Charter and in its commitment to fundamental freedoms and in the respective mandates of the relevant organs, including that of the Security Council in addressing security issues. It is also inarguable within customary international law that, as with all member nations, we are bound to commit to the continued existence and survival of the most vulnerable among us. We wish to thank member nations for their support in arriving at a consensus on this resolution. The Republic of the Marshall Islands again expresses its gratitude for the awareness and commitment by all nations to this vital issue. Thank you, Mr. President.